Before we begin, we'd like to give special thanks to all of our sponsors for helping make this event possible each year. Specifically, thank you to CRL FormFox for being our title sponsor for 5 consecutive years. And thank you to our platinum sponsors, AuraSure Technologies, Psychmedics, Samba Safety, UKG, and Quest Diagnostics.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining our session on the dangers of a non-drug testing drug testing policy. Today, we're joined by Bill Current, President and founder of the Current Consulting Group, as well as Rick Tennant, Vice President at the Current Consulting Group. Rick, Bill, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great today, Thomas.
Doing fine, Thomas. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you guys here. Before we jump into the presentation, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, use the Q&A button at the bottom right of the player. Any questions we're unable to answer today, we'll reach back out to you after Day with DISA. Additionally, we'll make a copy of this presentation available for download on the Materials tab at the end of the session. With that being said, Bill, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Thomas, and welcome everyone to today's presentation on the dangers of a non-drug testing drug testing policy or program. As Thomas mentioned, I'm Bill Current, President and founder of the Current Consulting Group. We started this company almost 25 years ago. This is our 25th year in business, and it has been one of the great benefits of our company to be associated with DISA for so many years now. And I want to just tip my hat to them again for Day with DISA, which has become one of the premier events of the year in the drug testing industry. We're really excited to be participating in it. And I'm going to be co-presenting today with Rick Tennant. He's the Vice President here at Current Consulting Group. And you can take some time as you review the slides later to look at our bios. Let me walk you through the agenda to give you a little idea of where we're going with this. I'm going to cover the introduction at the beginning, and then Rick will take you through the 5 signs of a non-drug testing drug testing policy. And then I'll come back in and talk about the legalization of marijuana, and Rick will cover the conclusion. The reason we're going to do the introduction as I take you through it, it's going to really set the stage for these 5 signs of a non-drug testing drug testing program. So let's start there with the introduction. So if you go to the internet and look up non-denial denial, this is what you'll find. A non-denial denial is a statement that at first hearing seems to be a direct, clear-cut, and unambiguous denial of some alleged accusation, but after being parsed carefully, turns out not to be a denial at all. And in the world of drug testing, a non-denial denial or a non-drug testing drug testing program is one that really doesn't produce any usable results for the employer. Yeah, you're collecting urine or oral fluid samples, you're sending them to a laboratory for analysis, but in essence, you're just checking a box because you're not doing certain things that are crucial to having a program that's producing good results that you can use, results that end up helping you achieve certain objectives. You're just simply checking a box. The results are not as important to you. We want to talk about why you want to do certain things to make sure that your drug testing program is actually useful to you. So if we take it one step further, I'm going to lay out some statistics for you to give you an idea of just how big the magnitude of the problem of substance abuse is and its direct impact on the workplace. So the National Safety Council, just a couple of years ago, came out with a report that concluded that 75% of people with a substance abuse disorder are employed. So 3/4 of people who admit to being substance abusers are actually employed. That comes out to about 15 to 17% of the workforce, about 1 in 6. A different study came out from the American Addiction Centers, which found that 22.5% of employees admit to using drugs or alcohol at work. So the other one was just general. This one is specific to people who admit to using drugs or alcohol at work. 3.3% of those who go to a workplace and nearly 14% of those who work remotely from home admit to being high on the job every week. That's a lot of people who are coming to work every day under the influence of drugs. Now, three very alarming facts that are having a direct effect on those statistics that I just shared with you. One, marijuana use is up. If you look to the right, you'll see marijuana use among adults 26 or older increased from 7% in 2002 to nearly 20% in 2020. And the fear of harm in using marijuana on a regular weekly basis declined from 36% to 27%. In other words, far fewer people now associate any negative impact from using marijuana on a regular basis. And as a result of that, there are literally millions of people who are trying marijuana for the first time every year. One of the major drug testing laboratories that comes out with a report every year found that the positivity rate for marijuana in the general US workforce, based on more than 6 million drug tests, so this was a huge sample, continued an upward climb, increasing 8.3% between 2020 and 2021. The 2022 statistics will come out later this year. That's the highest positivity rate ever recorded as part of this annual drug testing index report. Over 5 years, the positivity rate for marijuana in the general US workforce, so not counting DOT tests, increased 50% between 2017 and 2021. Now, here's the alarming part. If you're in a state that has legalized so-called recreational use of marijuana, marijuana positive drug test results surged in those states: California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, New York, New Jersey, etc. It surged in those states 118% between 2012 and 2020. The overall positivity rate in the combined US workforce, based on nearly 9 million drug tests, and these were just the urine tests that were conducted at this laboratory. They also do hair testing and oral fluid testing. But for the nearly 9 million urine tests conducted between January and December of 2021, positivity rate overall was up 4.6% compared to 4.4%, and up 31.4% from an all-time low of 3.5 just 10 years ago, a dramatic increase. Now, here's what the legalization map looks like. The orange states are the states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana. The blue states are the states that have legalized medical marijuana, keeping in mind that all the orange states already have legal medical marijuana laws on the books. And the white states are the holdouts. But don't let this map intimidate you. You can still do a lot to protect your workplace from marijuana and its negative impact on the workplace. Yes, marijuana is the #1 illicit drug of abuse in the United States. You can see the statistics here from the federal government. We know that certain other drugs have seen decreases. We suspect, however, when this year's report comes out from SAMHSA, from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, we'll see increases in some of these other categories like psychotherapeutic drugs and opioids in particular. Marijuana will continue to be the #1 substance of abuse, but other drugs are going to likely go up as well. 3 things to keep in mind as we look at the issue of marijuana in the workplace. At the Current Consulting Group, we do a survey every year of the drug testing industry. And we also do a survey of employers. And we asked employers, are you considering removing marijuana from your test panel in the next 12 months? And you can see between 2020 and 2021, the percentage that said yes increased from 5 to 9%. 10 years ago, it would have been 0. Now, in the middle, one company's test results for urine drug testing showed a dramatic increase in marijuana results from 2020 to 2021. And As part of that, we've also seen a dramatic increase in companies that are using oral fluid testing. So this is one company's increase in oral fluid testing between 2018 and 2021. You can see that in 2020, this company conducted over 2 million oral fluid drug tests, up from 1.3 million in 2018. Nearly 2 million in 2021. And I sometimes get asked the question, why didn't it keep pace? Why didn't it continue going up? And the response to that is that the overall number of drug tests went down. Oral fluid testing as a percentage of all drug tests conducted went up slightly. We asked the question in the future, now this was a question asked of drug testing providers, in the future, which drug testing method will be used the most? 50% said urine. Sounds like a lot. 10 years ago, it would have been 95 or 98%. But in the same survey that said 50%, 45% said oral fluid testing. Now, one of the reasons why companies decide not to do marijuana testing is because they think it's illegal in their state. That's not true. In reality, testing for marijuana is legal in virtually every state, with New York being the only exception. In virtually every other state, even those states that have legalized marijuana, if you go back and look at the legalization map, it's still legal to test for marijuana. There may be restrictions on what you can do with a positive drug test result, but the key is you still have the right to test for marijuana. And under most circumstances, you have the right to discipline employees or not hire job applicants who test positive. So with that, let's launch into our 5 signs of a non-drug testing drug testing program. And for that, I'm going to turn the virtual microphone over to my partner at Current Consulting Group, Rick Tennant.
Hey, thank you, Bill. And it's good to be with everybody today. I'm happy to be here and happy to be talking on this subject. We've been watching this information over the last several years, as you can see by the statistics that Bill just shared, and we've come up with a couple of things that have been made other companies successful in their drug testing program. We'd like to share those with you today. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to us, and we'll get those answered for you. As we put this presentation together, one of the things that we identified is this first sentence here at the top. You know, perhaps the most dangerous form of a non-drug drug testing is the one that does not test for marijuana. As Bill just mentioned on a previous slide, almost 9% of companies are considering dropping marijuana from their panels, and doing this it doesn't eliminate all of the problem. A lot of the companies are doing it because they're worried that it's not legal in their states. And with that, we ask you or encourage you to look closely at the state laws and make sure that you're aware of what is legal and what you can and can't do in those laws. But as we looked at these companies that are preparing to make the decision whether to continue to test for marijuana or not, we looked at some of the soft numbers that still are a factor in making this decision. And as you can see here in the following subsequent portion of this slide, excluding marijuana from your drug testing panel likely invites a lot of marijuana users in your community to apply for jobs at your companies. Now, at the same time, the reality is you've got people that will be coming to work impaired or under the influence of marijuana. And regardless of what they're doing, whether they're just, whether they're a clerk or somebody at a desk working on a computer, janitorial or a safety sensitive position, they're still more likely and more prone to creating accidents and having other issues with while under the influence of the drug. A few of the soft numbers that we identified here are listed here below. Absenteeism and turnover. People just don't stick with jobs as much if they're under the influence or using marijuana. The statistics over the years in the United States have shown this. And then in addition, more accidents and more workers' comp claims. And lastly, a decrease in productivity and safe work behavior. But this also doesn't, this last one is interesting because it also translates to those people that aren't using marijuana. There's a morale issue Oftentimes employees know what other employees are doing. And when they know that somebody else is under the influence or doing drugs at the workplace, sometimes that has a negative effect on their performance, and they don't perform as well as they did prior to knowing about their fellow employees using drugs. Now, marijuana may be legal in some states, but that doesn't mean everything that your employees do while they're under the influence of marijuana and at work are legal. There are still some things that companies are responsible for, and the legalization of marijuana has not suspended these two laws. The first one, negligent hiring. So if you've got somebody doing a safety sensitive position and they shouldn't be under the influence of marijuana specifically, you as a company, it would be in your best interest and a risk avoidance measure to continue testing for marijuana. And then the second one here, respondent superior. Just because somebody it is legal to use marijuana in a certain state, it doesn't mean that their actions aren't legal as well, as it says, here in the first part of this slide. But we have had a couple of cases where employers have been held responsible for employees operating either machinery or causing accidents while under the influence of marijuana, and the employees have still been responsible or found or deemed responsible by the courts. And so with that, probably the most famous one was the one that we've listed here. And a jury found an employer liable under the doctrine of respondent superior as well as negligence in hiring. And as you can see, they were ordered to pay almost $5 million in restitution and compensatory damages. The employer was unaware that the employee, when they hired her, was an alcoholic and living at a rehabilitation center there in town. The employee simply caused an accident that injured a customer, and during that, the information that followed, they found out that the employee, had been living in a halfway house and was under the care of alcoholism. And as you can see here at the very end, the post-accident drug test was done a few hours later. Even though the result was negative at the time, the company was still ordered to pay restitution for it. Number two, only testing for marijuana. Now, a few years ago, I had a company reach out to me and they said, "Hey, will you review my drug and alcohol testing program?" We said, "Sure." And so we took a look at it, and they were only testing for marijuana. They were only doing a quick test, urine-based instant device, and testing for marijuana. And with this, I called them back and I asked them what the overall goal of their drug testing program was. And they said, "You know what, we just really wanted to rule out, the one drug that we think is most popular, and that is marijuana." And, we said, "You know what, we understand your thought process there. It makes sense on one hand. However, there's a lot of statistics and a lot of data that support that marijuana users don't only use marijuana. And so if you're only testing for marijuana, you're then at that point, the company, your policy's out there, your employees know what they're doing. They read the policy, and then they tell their friends who may not use marijuana or use marijuana in addition to other drugs that you're inviting people with other drug problems to come and join your company." So with that, and as the statistics that Bill shared a few minutes ago, the past few years, especially since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of increases in other drugs, and we have, in addition to, and one of them being alcohol, in fact. And then in 2020, DISA reported that this was the first time they ever saw more amphetamines positives on random testing than marijuana positives. So other drugs are being used by quote unquote marijuana users. But in addition to that, if you're only testing for one drug and that drug is marijuana, you're missing a bigger problem that has surfaced here in the United States in the last few years. So, and then the last point there, it kind of goes without saying, only testing for marijuana essentially encourages your workers to come to work under the influence of drugs, whether it be alcohol or drugs and even prescriptions. So Real quick, we wanted to just share a few more statistics and trends that we've been seeing with that amphetamine surpassing marijuana in the number of positives. As you can see from this chart, we compared 2019 to 2020, and marijuana, as we mentioned just a moment ago, took first place in random drug tests by coming in with more positives than marijuana in that year. You can see cocaine still stayed. There were more positives in cocaine in 2019. Opioids, however, also surpassed their 2019 benchmark, and amphetamines as well. So with this, even though we saw a drop in cocaine here in 2019 to 2020, the other three drugs, it's an alarming increase as to what people are doing out there. So number 3, conducting one type of test for marijuana and then another type of test for all other drugs. For example, you'll use oral fluid testing for marijuana and then urine testing for the other drugs. Just from a one cost perspective, it gets expensive doing this. And so with that, the cost alone, as well as the trouble of having a collection site remember, oh yeah, I have to do 2 tests for this particular company, that gets sticky as well, and it doesn't always happen. A few other points, just 4 that we wanted to make, are here on this slide. This type of non-drug testing, drug testing program is the classic shooting in the dark approach. You're just never going to know what you're hitting or you're going to hit, because you're not really trying to, you don't even know if you'll hit anything at all. And as mentioned on the previous slide, the second point, marijuana users are also polydrug users. They don't just limit their use to marijuana solely. And so on any given day, polydrug users may come in under the influence of marijuana, and on the next day, they know that their production may have been down a little bit, and so they take an amphetamine to speed things up and produce more work that day, or at least that's their hope in the folks that we've talked to. And then lastly, in a post-accident drug scenario, this approach gives you about a 50-50 chance of testing for the right drug rather than 100% chance of getting a righteous positive test result, or being consistent and getting a result that you can actually take action on. Number 4, not testing for alcohol. I mentioned a moment ago that during COVID, alcohol use has been up. We actually have contact with one of a distributor who creates cartons and boxes for an alcohol manufacturer or producer. And I was talking to them this summer, and I was asking them about their business, and his comment was, he says, during COVID, he says, our production has doubled. He said he says, I know that's probably not something that is traceable in your world. And I cut him off and I said, actually, that's interesting. We knew that statistic, but it's funny that you saw it increase your business as well. And he says, yeah, he says, on one hand, I'm not complaining. He says, but man, he says, on the other hand, that's a lot of alcohol. So alcohol still is the number one substance of abuse, and it's simple. It's legal, and as long as you're old enough, you can consume it. But in addition to this, what we've seen over the last several years is alarming. The number of alcohol adults who admit to binge drinking, and that is having 5 or more drinks on at least one occasion per month, and then heavy drinkers admitting to having 5 or more drinks at least 5 or more occasions per month, is outpacing what is considered people that are regular marijuana users. And so as you're reviewing your policy and you're looking at ways to make your company safer and basically make your policy mirror your culture and what you want to accomplish with it, ignoring alcohol entirely is actually is a misstep in our opinion, and is something that should be considered, and there should be provisions for testing for alcohol in your company policy. This statistic is somewhat alarming. 40, as you can see there at the top, 49% of U.S. workers are struggling with alcohol and substance abuse. The annual substance abuse report revealed that since the start of the pandemic, in alcohol and other substances affecting 49% of the workers. Of those workers who report struggling with some level of addiction, the number of workers reporting lower productivity or missed work because of substance abuse or addiction has nearly doubled since 2019. And with, in addition, 36% further reporting that it's affected their work since the pandemic has begun. And typically that's in areas of lower productivity and missing work, which is you're having, companies are having less productive employees, making less money, and they're less efficient. So with this last point down here at the bottom, half of all full-time workers now report problem use of alcohol, drugs, or prescription medication, and 19 report at least they're using these things weekly. So alcohol and marijuana, the prevalence of simultaneous use is almost twice as high as concurrent use, implying that individuals that use both marijuana or cannabis and alcohol tend to use them at the same time. And furthermore, this use is associated with increased frequency and quantity of alcohol consumption. So simultaneous use was not also was most detrimental compared to alcohol only. Simultaneous use approximately doubled the odds of drunk driving, and as you can see here, social consequences, harms to self, as well as to people around. So the risks are up when you're using these two substances together. Lastly here, number 5, not conducting pre-employment testing. And this is also a trend. Trend is probably a strong word, but this is something that we're also seeing people consider, and that is, hey, we'll suspend pre-employment testing because it's too hard to hire people. The reality is it does send a message to your workforce, and with drug abuse and alcohol abuse at record highs, the number of people who are entering the system are, as Bill mentioned, up to 75% of the alcohol or drug users are employed full time. And so bullet point number 3 here, the negative consequences of workplace substance abuse testing are undeniable, costly, and often tragic. Substance abusers and people who abuse alcohol do create more accidents. That number has stayed fairly consistent over the years, at about 4 times more likely to produce an accident than their non-user counterparts. This translates to more injuries, workers' comp claims, basically just more money going out. And then sadly, there are, on occasion, there are fatalities. These things can be avoided, reduced, if not removed altogether. But you do have to take a stance on conducting drug and alcohol testing. So if your company, what if your company has had to screen out the individuals who abuse drugs before they go on your payroll? It's simple. That's a pre-employment test. And while we understand you have to balance this need against what the reality is in hiring people, what we're still seeing as most effective in the industry is the education. Once you educate people as to why you have a drug testing program and what the benefits are of your program, you're still going to get people to buy into that. And maybe they buy into it, and that means that they don't come to work under the influence of drugs or alcohol when they're scheduled to work. So pre-employment testing, it's always helped accomplish this objective. And the reality is it's probably more important now than today than it ever has been. It's still legal in all 50 states. And it does keep people away or makes them question whether or not they want to work for a particular company. We saw this a lot. This particular point happened a lot when hair testing became more popular. Companies that adopted hair testing would look at it. Employees would look at companies that did hair testing, and they would shy away from those companies and choose a company that maybe only did urine testing. At the end of the day, it does save money. It keeps people that potentially have issues with coming to work and out of your workforce. And so one person that I knew early on in my career used to say it's easier to keep a substance abuser out of your company than it is to get them out after the fact. And so pre-employment testing accomplishes that objective as well. The last one here, if anyone says you don't need to conduct pre-employment testing because marijuana is legal and employers don't have the right to know if an applicant uses marijuana, basically run in the opposite direction as fast as possible. So not conducting pre-employment testing. In a recent survey, admitted drug users who are full-time employed, 40% of them said they're less likely to work for a company that conducted random testing. And then 30% said they're less likely to work for a company that conducted pre-employment testing. It's interesting that there was a slight decrease in the 30%, versus the random. And those of you who've been in the industry for a long time, you'll understand what I'm about to say. And that is a pre-employment urine test is sometimes considered just an IQ test. They know which drug they like to use, and they know which drug they're using. They know how long it stays in their system. And so they clean up prior to taking or conducting the pre-employment test, and they get into a company knowing that there's a chance that they're going to be randomly tested, or post-accident tested, or even reasonable suspicion tested. But they figure that they're going to roll the dice, so to speak, and run with that until the time comes that they get caught. So employers, lastly, here to wrap up, employers who conduct drug testing don't end up hiring 30 to 40% of drug users who don't want to work for companies who do conduct drug testing. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the legalization of marijuana, because it affects these drug testing issues so directly nowadays. And I want to just harken back to the slide Rick showed about simultaneous use of alcohol and marijuana. And you don't have to go back to that one, Rick, but let me just make this point. We've seen a dramatic increase in simultaneous use of alcohol and marijuana, to the point where, we can now document that when people use one, they use the other at the same time. And it leads to all kinds of negative consequences. And so in states where marijuana is legal, the possibility of simultaneous use of alcohol is even greater, as are the negative consequences. Just a few slides on marijuana, the legalization of marijuana. So we know already that marijuana positives have surged over the last 5 years, dramatic increase. If you look at that third bullet, though, urine positivity rates for post-accident testing increased at a greater rate than pre-employment testing over 5 years. So in other words, as companies choose either not to do pre-employment testing or not to test for marijuana in a pre-employment test, they're now experiencing a dramatic increase in post-accident positive drug tests. In other words, more accidents, more positives in post-accident testing. That's a pretty dramatic statistic to be aware of if you're thinking about discontinuing testing for marijuana, especially in a safety-sensitive industry. There was a report that came out from the University of Sydney that looked at 80 different studies from around the world on the window of impairment from marijuana. In other words, how long does somebody stay impaired by marijuana? Our first bullet there, quoting, depending on how much THC is taken. So THC is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, and it varies. The level varies depending on the source of your marijuana and where you got it. In Colorado, for example, they're experimenting with marijuana with THC levels above 50%, which is outrageous. Also, how the drug is used, whether it's smoked or eaten, like a marijuana-laced brownie, and the person using it, what's their experience. And they have found that the use of marijuana causes cognitive impairment that can last from 3 to 10 hours. So if you're using a drug testing method that only has a 2 to 3 hour window of impairment or window of detection, but people are using marijuana and staying impaired, not necessarily high, not necessarily intoxicated, but impaired for up to 10 hours, then you're missing 70 to 80% of the people who are on the job impaired by marijuana. Now, it can vary, okay? That window of impairment can vary. Look at the second to last bullet. More typical duration of impairment, however, is 4 hours. When lower doses of THC are consumed via smoking or vaporization and simpler tasks are undertaken, then that window of impairment could be less than 10 hours. But the impairment can go for hours beyond that, depending on the dosage, the THC level, and the task that's being asked the person to do. So for example, if you're asking somebody to operate a forklift or to drive a delivery van, for example, then that impairment can last for many hours beyond 3 or 4 hours. That's important to know if you're considering discontinuing testing for marijuana. Because the drug testing method you use will make all the difference in whether or not you have an effective program. So when we talk about non-drug testing, drug testing, if you're using a drug testing method that doesn't cover that entire 3 to 10 hour window of impairment, then you're really just checking a box. You're not necessarily drug testing to keep your workplace drug-free. You're simply testing a box to say, we drug test. So with that detection, to detect recent use of drug testing is important, right? Especially in a safety sensitive industry. With a window of detection of at least 10 hours, that's going to give you the opportunity to meet the dual priorities of keeping your workplace safe and not prying too far back into people's lives, especially in states where marijuana has been legalized. And so there are various drug testing methods to choose from. The two that have been endorsed by the federal government are lab-based urine testing and lab-based oral fluid testing. Those are the only two drug testing methods that SAMHSA has drug testing standards out, published standards available. And those are the two that you have to choose from. So you just want to make sure that you have a drug testing method that covers that entire window of impairment of 3 to 10 hours. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're still testing for marijuana where it's legal, which is in every state but New York, because the results of not testing for marijuana are predictable. And you see those bullets there. I get asked this question now about California. We just got this question again yesterday. Is it legal or illegal to test for marijuana in California? Or is it legal or illegal to test for marijuana with urine testing in California? Because California just passed a new law that's going to make it very, very difficult for employers to test for marijuana with a urine test. They can still use oral fluid, but urine testing is going to become more complicated. That new law goes into effect January 2024. So there's a lot of time for some changes to be made, for some sanity to bring some reasoning to that new law, but that's the way it's written. It's not a New York prohibition on testing for cannabis, but it would have a direct impact on pre-employment testing for marijuana and which drug testing methods you can use. Remember, in all 50 states, employers still have the right to prohibit employees from using marijuana on the job, bringing marijuana into the workplace, and being at work impaired or under the influence of marijuana. These three rights will never be eliminated. Even in the most pro-marijuana friendly state, employers still have the right to prohibit people from using marijuana at work, bringing marijuana to the workplace, or being under the influence or impaired by marijuana at work. And this is important because you're still responsible for the actions of your employees while they're at work. If they use marijuana outside the workplace, if they don't come to work impaired by marijuana, they're not bringing marijuana into the workplace with them, that's their business. So the best defense against the increase in marijuana, especially in states that have legalized recreational marijuana use, is to simply comply with the law and don't relinquish your rights to maintain a drug-free workplace, including a marijuana-free workplace, simply because marijuana has been legalized in your state. And so, to be clear, employees who use marijuana at work, who are impaired by marijuana on the job, who bring marijuana into the workplace, may face adverse employment actions in virtually every state. That could include termination of employment, but check with the local laws that apply to you. If you're an employer that's in more than one state, you may have to have some addendums to your policy that take into account the differing restrictions on what you can do with a marijuana positive result. But don't be intimidated by the marijuana map. You still have the right to address marijuana in the workplace, even if some conditions apply in states that have legalized marijuana. And with that, let's go to our conclusion, and I'll turn the mic back over to Rick Tennant.
Hey, thank you, Bill. In conclusion, we just have a few thoughts to wrap up today's presentation and give you some ideas to take back to your companies as you look at your company policy for 2023 and beyond. With this, we ask you to, as you're concluding or you're thinking about your company policy, we want you to kind of begin with the end in mind, and that is take a look at what's legal in your states. Basically, start out with what you want to accomplish with your drug testing program, and then make sure that you're legal in the states that you operate in. Understand the laws, what you can and can't do, and we still encourage everybody to have a robust drug testing panel that basically includes marijuana as well as other commonly abused drugs in your area. It's not uncommon for us to, by geography, have companies that reach out and ask us to include certain drugs that they want to test for in certain areas. At that point, we help them identify the state laws and see if there are any concerns with that. But we also, then we encourage them to reach out to their lab or provider to talk about adding those particular drugs. In addition, in today's presentation, we made a case for pre-employment testing to continue to test for pre-employment. It still makes sense, and it just makes sense. Include alcohol. Alcohol is still the #1 drug in the U.S., and it's even though it's legal, it does cause problems in the workplace. And then a zero tolerance policy towards workers being on the job while high on any drug is highly recommended. There was also an old saying that was going around the industry a few years ago, and that is, you can't push a rope. If there are no consequences to your drug testing program and employees don't know what the consequences are, if it's gray area or if it's just confusing, you want to clarify. You want to clearly state those what the expectation is and what the consequences are in your drug and alcohol testing policy. At the end of the day, a powerful, results-oriented drug testing program is what stands between you and hiring people that are going to come into your company and operate under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Doing this sends a clear message to those that are part of your company that you take safety very seriously in the workplace. And we kind of did this in reverse. If you notice here, you take safety in the workplace seriously, but that running a profitable business is important to you, and that drugs and alcohol don't work here, that they do minimize efficiency, and then here lastly, the two last bullet points: you care about the well-being of your employees, and you're doing it for them, because the majority of the employees that do work for companies don't use drugs or alcohol while on the job. Comprehensive drug testing program can also help establish a legal shield and reduce your risk as employers in the event something does happen and a lawsuit is brought either by an employee that was on an accident on company time, or perhaps with your vehicle, or another dangerous drug while they're on operating in the capacity of employment for you. And so don't conduct drug testing for appearances only. We used to call this a rubber stamp drug test. Companies that would just do it, and they really didn't even take action on the positives that they did get. But be specific about what your objectives are. Again, begin with the end in mind. Understand what you want to accomplish by your drug testing program, and then build the parts and pieces that complement that. Comply with all applicable state drug testing laws and federal, but we encourage you, even at this in 2023, don't surrender to drug use by not testing for marijuana, or only testing for marijuana, not testing for alcohol, or not conducting pre-employment testing, as we said earlier in the presentation. With that, thank you for allowing us to be part of the presentation today. And Thomas, I'll turn it over for you for questions and answers.
Awesome. Thank you so much to both of you for your time today. Well, let's dive into some questions here. Again, if we're unable to answer your question today, don't worry. We're going to take all the questions that are unanswered, kick them back over to Rick and Bill, get those answers, and then we'll get back to you guys within the next couple of days, probably next week, though, if we're honest. So first question, it's legal to use marijuana where I work. Can I still discipline an employee who tests positive for marijuana?
Well, the answer to that is it depends. It depends on the state that you're in. Some states with legal marijuana laws have very specific language about the workplace and what employers can do with a positive drug test result. So the best answer to that question would be, what state are we talking about? And then delve into that state law to know for sure. What we do know, and what we talked about in the presentation, is that even in a state that's legalized marijuana, an employer can take action if somebody comes to work with marijuana, or if somebody is impaired or under the influence of marijuana while on the job. All of these pro-marijuana state laws almost typically include language that allows employers to continue to take action if you can show a connection between impairment from marijuana and a positive drug test result.
And so, Bill, safe to say reasonable suspicion tied with a ton of documentation and information is key.
Yeah, you're going to want to, like any other circumstance, you're going to want to document the behavior that led up to the reasonable suspicion drug test. So you've got a positive drug test for marijuana, but we also have documented behavior leading up to it that, when combined, give you, the employer, the right to take some type of disciplinary action.
Awesome. Next question, does marijuana affect employees the same way alcohol does?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. You know, they're two different drugs that have very similar effects on the individual. And so, yes, would be a fair answer. But so much depends on the individual and how much they consumed. So if you go back to one of the slides in our presentation where we talked about the duration of impairment from marijuana, remember we said that it depends on the THC content level, the drug use history of the individual, and the tasks that they're being asked to perform. And all of those things have an impact on the individual's, the effects of those drugs on the individual.
Gotcha. What about just removing marijuana from pre-employment testing? Does that help at all?
You know, well, we are seeing some companies do that in states where legalization is specific, meaning recreational marijuana is available. It's again, I guess it comes down to what you're doing, what your company's doing, and what the employees are going to be doing. It's you know, if they're in a safety sensitive position, even in a warehouse, or they're, you know, operating some kind of equipment, probably I would reconsider removing that from their test panel. However, if they're having we had one company that we talked to in a state where they had recreational marijuana, and they basically had a bunch of clerical positions, and they said, hey, we're really not being able to hire, you know, a lot of people, so we're not going to advertise this, but we are going to stop testing for marijuana. And so it was a solution for them. So the short answer, I guess, is it depends. Depends on your company and what the employees are going to be doing.
Yeah, I think where it's legal, it's always a good idea to do the pre-employment testing. Rick referred to some legal cases that have gone against employers because they didn't make a quote unquote good faith effort to ensure that their workers were drug-free. Part of that has to do with screening individuals before you hire them to drive a delivery van, for example, or to operate a forklift or some other heavy machinery. And so, well, a pre-employment test doesn't eliminate all workplace accidents related to substance abuse. It does eliminate many, and it eliminates hiring many drug users before they go on your payroll. But it also shows that as an employer, you made a good faith effort to try to keep substance abusers out of your workforce, and before they could cause an accident that might harm an individual, or as Rick talked about, even perhaps cause a fatality. That good faith effort goes a long way in an employer's legal defensibility if they're ever challenged on a drug test result or on an accident related to substance abuse.
Well, and I think you just answered the next question I see here, which is if I don't random test and someone causes an accident and is found to be impaired on a post-accident, does that increase my liability? And I think you're saying yes.
It can. Now, again, we want to make sure that, you know, random testing is legal in the state that we're talking about, or the kind of random testing this company wants to do. But the critical point is, as a company, we're aware that substance abuse is a problem. We take great effort to prevent our employees from being substance abusers on the job. We may not be able to prohibit them from using marijuana at home or over the weekend if it's legal in a particular state, but we go to great lengths to make sure that they're not high on the job, they're not bringing marijuana into the workplace, and they're not impaired, you know, by marijuana while on the job. And when we as an employer can improve that because we do like random testing, for example, then we significantly increase the legal defensibility of our program.
Gotcha. So why shouldn't marijuana be legal if alcohol is already legal?
Well, that, you know, if you don't mind, Thomas, and I realize you didn't ask that question, but that's one of the most, you know, annoying questions that gets asked about the whole marijuana issue. Marijuana is different than alcohol, but the two drugs tend to have very similar effects on users, from a health issue, from effects on intellectual development on young people, all the way to impairment in the workplace. And so at the same time that we don't allow employees to be drunk from alcohol on the job, we shouldn't be allowing employees to be high on marijuana and impaired by marijuana while on the job. And so if I'm an employer, I'm going to prohibit my employees from being under the influence of both of those drugs during the workday and from bringing both of those drugs into the workplace. I'm not going to make a distinction between the two. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act does treat a current alcohol abuser differently than a current drug abuser. But in terms of my workplace, I have the right to prevent those individuals from being under the influence or impaired while on the job, whether it's marijuana or alcohol.
Gotcha. So why can't we test to see if someone's high for marijuana at a given moment the same way we can test to see if someone's impaired by alcohol?
Well, because right now there is no legal standard for what is marijuana impairment. So for alcohol, of course, we have a national standard for driving under the influence at 0.08 blood alcohol content. And under the DOT regulations, anyone at 0.04 or higher has to be removed from performing safety sensitive jobs. In other words, they're in violation of the DOT regulations. In fact, they have to be removed from performing safety sensitive functions at 0.02. But we don't have standards like that for marijuana. I think anybody who's honest in our business will tell you that a drug test doesn't prove impairment. That's why it goes back to what you said earlier, Thomas, which is that in addition to a positive drug test result, I want documentation of other things that this individual has done that prompted the drug test. They're late for work on a regular basis. They've caused extra accidents to occur. They've gotten into confrontations with coworkers, et cetera. And I've documented all of that. And in combination with a positive drug test result, I now have the information I need to be able to bring about adverse employment action against that individual. And that could be true with alcohol as well. But with marijuana, because it's such a hot button issue, and because a drug test alone, whether it's urine, oral fluid, breath, or hair, it does not prove that an individual is impaired, because impairment is affected by so many different things, including how much drug they use, the THC level, the drug use history of the individual, and how they use the drugs. Eating a marijuana-laced brownie versus smoking marijuana. So all of those things get taken into account. But the most important thing to understand is that while I can test somebody for alcohol, and if it's at a certain blood alcohol content level or above, I can legally claim that this individual is impaired by alcohol. There is no equivalent for marijuana. Somebody tests positive for marijuana doesn't necessarily mean that that person's impaired. Here's another important point, which is that there's a difference between marijuana intoxication and marijuana impairment. Being high on marijuana versus being impaired by marijuana. The intoxicating effects of marijuana wear off within an hour or two, and the individual may still be impaired, unable to perform certain functions, even though they no longer feel like they're high, that the intoxication has worn off. That's an important distinction to make in the workplace as well. But the bottom line is, it still makes sense to drug test for marijuana, because it's going to dramatically increase the legal defensibility of your program if you can show the world that even though this individual caused an accident and they tested positive for marijuana, we made a good effort, a good faith effort to prevent that by happening by doing pre-employment and random testing for marijuana.
Great. Well, hey, Bill, Rick, thank you so much for coming out and spending some time with us today. We greatly appreciate it. With that being said, thank you to all of the attendees who came out for the first day of Day with DISA. We look forward to seeing you in many of the other sessions over the rest of this week and appreciate your attendance today. Thank you.